Today, I'm proud to stand by the promise I've made to every Wisconsinite that I will always deliver justice and bring common sense to our Supreme Court.
For the first time in 15 years, Wisconsin's Supreme Court will no longer lean conservative. Democratic-backed candidate Janet Protasiewicz defeated Republican-backed Daniel Kelly in what became the most expensive judicial race in U.S. history at more than $40 million that was spent. For more on why the race has gotten so much attention, let's bring in A.J. Bayatpour. He's a state house and political reporter with our Milwaukee affiliate, WDJ T. I oddly said Tay the wrong way. A big issue in this race was the state's 174-year-old abortion ban. What is the fate with that law now that Protasiewicz is on the court?
Well, John, thank you for having me. It is almost certain that abortion ban is going to be overturned. The Democratic Attorney General already filed a lawsuit last summer challenging the legitimacy of that 1849 ban. It only makes exceptions for cases where a mother's life is at risk. On the campaign trail, Janet Protasiewicz said she believes in a woman's right to abortion and that the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided. She would say that that's not necessarily her tipping her hand on how she'd rule in that case, but reading between the lines, it was about as close to you can get for a candidate in a judicial race explicitly saying how you could expect them to rule should, as expected, that lawsuit challenging the abortion ban reach the state's highest court.
AJ, another big issue, of course, is the question of redistricting. And so the new court could look at Republican redistricting efforts. How might that change Wisconsin's political landscape if the court throws out the current legislative map?
Well, it does not necessarily mean that the Democrats would win both chambers in the state legislature right away, but those races would become a lot more competitive. For context, going back to 2000, every presidential election in the state, with the exception of 2, were decided by less than 1 percentage point. So these statewide races typically are neck and neck. At the same time, the Republicans, with the way the maps are drawn right now, just picked up a 2/3 majority in the state Senate and are just 2 seats away from having a 2/3 majority in the state assembly. Now, due to kind of the way liberals cluster in Madison and Milwaukee, you'd expect that in a 50-50 race, Republicans would have a few more seats, but certainly not a 2/3 majority like they do right now. So you'd expect with new, more fairly drawn maps, Republicans would have a natural edge, but a very narrow edge.
You've teed up the next question, which is Wisconsin is a tight state, battleground state in the national elections. How or should we draw any conclusions or stop from doing so by this race and the fact that Protasiewicz won?
Well, I think when you look at what's happened in recent elections, the majority of which have gone to the Democratic or liberal candidate, I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say that Wisconsin is becoming a blue state per se. It's still very competitive, but there is one trend that I look at very closely that I'm sure Republicans do too that has to concern them. In some of the key Milwaukee suburbs, specifically Waukesha County and Ozaukee County, to the west and north respectively, those had been Republican strongholds. There is an ongoing trend, really going back to especially 2016 when Donald Trump first ran for president, of those suburbs becoming a little bit more purple. They are not those dark red shades that they once were when this state was making national headlines in the days of former Republican Governor Scott Walker. So if that trend continues, the Republicans are absolutely going to have a much more uphill climb. The question then is this driven by demographic changes in those suburbs? Is this driven largely by suburban moms backlashing against this abortion ban since last year? I think that trend in those 2 suburban counties are what I would watch most closely when seeing what the long-term outlook is for these statewide races going forward.
Waukesha, one of those counties we all pay a lot of attention to on election night in the presidential race. AJ, one last question back on the Supreme Court. You mentioned Republican control of the legislature. So what could happen if anything? Protasiewicz doesn't take office until for a few months, right? And so is there anything the legislature could do to basically diminish the power of the Supreme Court in Wisconsin?
Well, the state Senate, by virtue of having picked up a 2/3 supermajority, now has the ability to impeach what the state constitution describes as civil officers. That's a bit of a vague term, and it's not exactly clear who is or is not a civil officer. There had been some talk. One of the state Senate candidates had indicated that he would be open to impeaching Janet Protasiewicz, not from the Supreme Court, but from her role as a Milwaukee County judge, saying that she had a number of sentences that he felt were dangerously lenient and that he may want to pursue impeachment because of that. Again, not very clear how that would shake out, if that would be allowed. Every single Republican senator would have to be on board with that. And really, that all ended up getting put to bed today because the Senate Majority Leader, Devin LeMahieu, I asked him personally one-on-one at a state budget hearing this afternoon in Waukesha if he would go for that, and he simply said in a word, no.
Oh, that's great reporting. AJ Byaport, thank you so much.